People on the left-hand side by the doors will open the doors and find a newspaper or something and lock it open, and that would help. The other doors will have to, their doorways will have to be kept open. We will have requirements from the fire marshal. We're pleased to see so many people turning out for the meeting of the People's Grand Jury tonight. We might explain a little bit what the People's Grand Jury is about for those who haven't heard before. And I'll try to keep my remarks as brief as possible because I know you didn't come down to hear me speak. You came down to hear Bo Gritz, and we have someone else that you're familiar with who would like to say a few words. But basically, the People's Grand Jury has a purpose, and that's to make sure that our three branches of government work as checks and balances as they were designed. The grand jury, those two words, are mentioned just once in the Constitution of the United States. They're mentioned under the Fifth Amendment. Just a moment.
Why is there?
That's all right. We're just trying to clear the doorway so that we don't violate the fire laws.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sure can. How's that? Fine. The grand jury, as I said, was mentioned just once in the Constitution of the United States. For those who haven't read it, and it happens to be in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, which talk about Bill of Rights. Now, as you should have been taught, as most of us were not, the Bill of Rights are inalienable. They were God-given. They were not something that our lawmakers gave to us. It's something that we gave to, well, God gave to us, and we granted certain concessions to our lawmakers. Since the Fifth Amendment is an inalienable right, it gives us the right for us, the people, to form a grand jury to make sure that our government works the way it's supposed to work. Now, I don't know how many here feel that our government is out of control, that we have reason to fear our government. And that was not a Nazi salute, by the way. The true power to enforce justice and prevent manipulation by corrupt politicians rests solely with we the people. The grand jury is action-oriented. It's not a learning group. It's not a talking group. It is action. And that's the reason we want to acquaint most of you with the fact that we have started some action. We need volunteers, and it's going to be rough because the statute grand juries, those that are formed under law, have the right to demand of we the people that we pay for these grand juries. And we cannot offer that to anyone who is going to volunteer their services. But we can guarantee that somewhere along the line, we will have taken back part of what rightfully belongs to us. The authority and the jurisdiction, a lot of people feel we will be challenged. And actually, I'd like to turn that around and challenge those who have usurped the power of the grand jury, and that is the judiciary, who have written laws and have them rubber stamped by the legislative branches of government. There is no authority in the Constitution for anyone to write any sort of statutes requiring any action on the part of the grand jury. In other words, any statutes, any laws that we have on the books are unconstitutional. So the challenge should come from us to them rather than the other way around. Right now, we're going to be following, or we have been following, the Nevada Revised Statutes and using those as rules, not as laws. It has been said that, and I wish I knew who said this because I heard on Lou Epton's program, I believe, that we have traded freedom for security. We're trading security for maximum security, and that comes with barbed wire around it. We have two choices, or several choices. We can prepare to fight or flee, or we can act now to peacefully retake what we have already lost or about to lose. I have here something that was written and called a letter from heaven. It says, "Dear loved ones, yesterday I was a true patriot and a free man. I studied, I did research on my own, attended lectures and seminars until I was completely convinced of my rightful position under the Constitution for the United States. I did all the right things and became a preambled free man instead of a 14th Amendment serf. I even got untaxed, as was my right as a free man. As a well-informed and studious person, I armed myself, as is my right, and made decisions and moves to protect my property. I even got others involved in the learning process, and still I felt there was something left undone. One night I was awakened by a disturbance outside my home, so I prepared for trouble. And as I looked out on the street to see about 30 black-clothed men with weapons, it was time for action. They crashed through my security gate and in one blow took the front door off the hinges. A firefight ensued. We got 3 of them before they could annihilate us. Now I know what I neglected to do. There is a need to apply all that I learned towards finding an action that would result in regaining the freedoms we lost without resorting to violent confrontation. Maybe it wouldn't have worked out, but I should have tried it, instead of continuing the learning and the talking." Now I'd like to invite my wife, of many arguments,
Snitcher. Tonight we have a celebrity in the house that has done an awful lot for the patriotic movement. And at this time, I would like you to give a nice big hand for Lou Epton.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for loving this flag and this country. God bless you all, and I mean that. You know, a lot of people think you're listening to vote rights, you're going to preparedness seminars. What the hell are you talking about? You guys must be a bunch of kooks, crackpots, radicals, and from a county commissioner, I think once, Nazis. We're Americans. We haven't loved this country. We share that. It's been good to us, and we see signs of things that are very disturbing. As a matter of fact, I think it was Anthony Hilder who said, and I want to give him the credit because I love the saying, it's true. If you take a look at Germany back in the 1930s, if you take a look at Warsaw, what happened, and you overlay it with what's going on in our government today, it's scary, because it's damn near a perfect match. The media discredits, they're attacking smaller groups for whatever reason. They discredit, they create the stories just like they've created the problems, and then they think they've got all the answers. And every time they have an answer, we lose more of our rights and our liberties. They want to justify every illegal act that they're perpetrating. I haven't put it into perspective, but I was talking to some folks out front earlier, and I want to get it all in sequential order. You go back to the founding of this great country. We had common law. We were sovereigns. We lived in sovereign states. They weren't telling us what we should think, where we should work, or how we should spend whatever dollars we might have had. You've got a number of items that have come along, and they've all been beautifully packaged. One of the most beautifully done was a retirement package called Social Security. It made a lot of sense to a lot of folks, didn't it? Because, hey, I'm not swift enough to set money aside. I like to go out and spend it, and by golly, if I put some money aside, if the government does it for me, then when I reach retirement age, I'll have a little nest egg, and I won't have to worry about survival. And look what's happened to Social Security. How many of us were aware at the time Congress instituted the Federal Reserve Bank? How many of us even really cared? We were dealing with silver certificates and a lot of coins. What was this Federal Reserve Bank? I sure wasn't paying any attention to it. They come along with a personal income tax that was kind of mute for a number of years. It isn't anymore. They've come along with one marvelous idea after another. I don't know how you see it, but if you put all these pieces in their proper order, it begins to feel a lot like a vice, getting tighter and tighter and tighter, till there's none of us left. What happened in Waco? What happened in Ruby Creek? Will that be the end of it? I'd like to wish it would. I was watching 60 Minutes. I know a number of you did too. When I heard Andy Rooney at the end of the program, I never was more upset in my life. It was so damn plastic. Just government word for word for word, and he's upset? The man can do his own homework, his own research. I don't necessarily agree with what David Koresh was doing, but damn it, he had the right under the Constitution. I don't understand a lot of things that are going on today. We're all learning. On the news tonight on NBC, they were talking about food stamps. They're there for our benefit too, aren't they? Nobody should go hungry, which is true. Certainly not if they live in Somalia. God knows they shouldn't go hungry. We here in the country, well, you know now it is the middle class Americans that are using food stamps more than not. I don't care what the employment figures say. When these factories went south of the border and left a lot of unemployed, who had mortgages, who had families, who had car payments like a lot of other folks. They had good jobs once upon a time. Do you really think they're earning the same money, those that were lucky enough to find a new job? Not really. I'm getting a little scattered and I apologize. I didn't plan to take a lot of time. I primarily really wanted to thank you, and I'm just pleased as can be. Anytime I get a chance to be in the same room with a man I consider a real hero, a real American, a real patriot, not a radical, not a kook, an honest human being, the man you came to hear and see. Let's get him up here right now. Colonel James O. Gritz.
Sounds a lot better than Lou's. You mind if it? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm going to leave you a lot of time. I'll make sure. This time I'm going to really do it. I got a delightful call. I was over at Corky's picking up my spike Jeep, and Lou called me, said he would be over, and I said, good grief, Lou, don't you ever have any time for yourself? Seems like you're almost wedded to the Patriot Movement. And he said something very impressive. He said, Bo, the Patriot Movement is my life now. He says, I am wedded to it. I think we're very fortunate to have a person who not only has a voice almost every workday here in Las Vegas, but a person who's genuinely dedicated to the Patriot Movement. I'd like to give Lou Upton another round of applause. Now, someone belongs to this little person here. I know how you are.
If you don't claim her, I'll take her home.
That's right. Okay, here's the Now, the other day at the Preparedness Expo, I thank the Tootle brothers because I just was so impressed that people kept coming up saying, we saw your first presentation. We weren't able to be at the expo, but we watched it on Tootle Vision. And I don't get Tootle Vision, unfortunately. I live out at Sandy Valley, and Tootle Vision is low-power television. God be praised for this kind of communication, however. If there was enough of it, we could probably blanket the United States with the fullness of the truth. But there are other people, and as I see the cameras here, Ray's here and others, I hope that what they're doing is recording the things that they hear for people who aren't able to be here because of their work schedule or whatever, that they might make the tapes available where people can copy them for free, pass them around if they will, so that, like oil spots, we just spread out gradually across the land. I want to speak just about a couple of things very quickly. Obviously, WACO, and in the wake of WACO, I guess in the ashes thereof, I should say, the Weaver trial becomes even more important to all of America because the Weavers right now are fighting a tremendous battle for every American. And you can be right and still lose when your government is wrong. And I'm afraid that's exactly what would be the case right now in Boise, Idaho, if it wasn't for Jerry Spence. For some of you who may not have received a complete briefing, just very quickly, Jerry Spence, so you'll recognize the name, someday he may be representing you, just like he is the Weavers. He's a millionaire. He lives on a ranch in Wyoming. He wears a big broad-brimmed hat, cowboy boots, and a big silver buckle. Jerry Spence does this, I think, because I know a little bit about psychology and about lawyers. He does this to intimidate his opposition. And he does it very well, I might add. Jerry Spence does not take 1 cent for the cases that he defends. And the cases that he has taken on, he has won. Jerry Spence was a prosecutor for a long time. And when I called him on Saturday, before Randall Weaver and his daughters came out on Monday, I got him on the phone in his Wyoming home. I said, this is Bo Gritz. Do you know who I am? He said, I've heard of you. I said, do you know what's going on up here in northern Idaho? And he said, no, not very much. He said, we're not getting any news. He said, I'm aware that there's some kind of a siege going on with a neo-Nazi. And I said, well, let me tell you what's actually happening up here. And I gave him the briefing. And he said, what do you want me to do, Bo? And I said, I want you to agree to defend Randall Weaver. And he said, all right, what else? I said, nothing. You just enjoy your Saturday. And I hung up the phone. Now, I knew then that we had the very best defense counsel in the country. He is Perry Mason. If Mason's spirit is alive out of Hollywood, it is in the form of Jerry Spence. And Spence is already proving invaluable to the Patriot Movement. Now, when Spence arrived at Boise, he made a statement I didn't fully understand. He said, I'm here to keep a promise I never made. I think what he's trying to do is be politically correct. I think he's afraid that some people are going to try to paint him as a white supremacist, as a neo-Nazi, as some kind of a weirdo. But I believe that before Spence is over, he'll be very proud of the job that he has done for the entire American people across this whole nation. Because when he wins this case, which he is going to for Weaver and for Kevin Harris, it'll be a victory for all of us because it's not the ending. It's just the beginning. The next move is, and I had an agreement with Jerry Spence that we wouldn't ever bring this up until the case was over. But the way I was able to break the police line, and as far as I know, the only way, other than some kind of surreptitious entry to the Weaver cabin, which, by the way, we were considering, the only way we were able to break that police line is with a citizen's arrest. The federal forces are ignorant and confused about the rights of the citizens. But any time that you mention the people, or any time that you mention the citizens, it sends a chill up their spine. I've watched it any number of times. And so I called Eric Leiter in Hawaii, and I didn't know a thing about how to make up these kinds of things. And I asked Eric, I said, please, you draft me up a citizen's arrest for the governor of Idaho, because unlike the governor of Texas, Ann Richards, Governor Andrus surrendered his two counties, Boundary County and Bonner County, to martial law, which meant that the federal government had charge of the evidence and of the entire target area. They brought in and federalized the National Guard, just like you saw, only you didn't have any television of the Weaver situation. It was being pretty well frozen out. But that citizen's arrest of William Sessions, head of the FBI, Henry Hudson, head of the Marshal Service, and Gene Glenn, the chief agent in charge at that site, almost immediately, like a hot knife through butter, that citizen's arrest opened the police line within 15 minutes after I read the summons, which was that there had been heinous crimes committed. There was a wrongful death of a United States Marshal. Some reason or other, he had his life taken. There was a wrongful death of a young 13-year-old boy that only weighed 70 pounds, Sammy Weaver. And someone was responsible. And we were saying that as citizens, we figured it was the governor for surrendering his counties unconstitutionally to martial law, that it was the head of the FBI for sending those snipers in there that made the statement that no one was coming off the top of the hill alive. They were going to kill them all. And it was head of the Marshal Service for not using the sheriff and going through proper procedure and serving any kind of a legal, lawful Fourth Amendment warrant. And it was Gene Glenn's personal responsibility because he was the bureaucrat in charge. 15 minutes later, it was like Moses had parted the Red Sea. And I was summoned behind the line and then intimidated for about, a New York second, when they said, Colonel Gritz, we're going to arrest you for inciting the riot. This is Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. This is the FBI. Normally, we just fall over like cockroaches, put our arms and legs up in the air in total subservient surrender, would we not? But not anymore, because we've come to a point in time when nature abhors a vacuum, and there is so much power on the side of tyranny that all of a sudden the scales have got to be retilted, and the only way to tilt them is through power of the people. And if we'll assert ourselves, then we can do what otherwise will be totally impossible. Once we broke that police line, you know what happened. It was a series of minor miracles up there, and it wasn't my expertise. It simply was that we happen to be vessels for the Holy Spirit of God to work through, and through your prayers, and through our own prayers, we were able to get that family out alive. A lot of parallels, friends, with Weaver and WACO. And I think you'll see the same type of cookie cutter. You're going to see the same mark. When the beast walks, it leaves a taint, a track, a scent behind. And I think you can notice this in many cases. I saw so many parallels between northern Idaho and WACO, it wasn't even funny. And I have to apologize to you. I have to apologize to those who are no longer with us in the Branch Davidian. I've got to apologize to the FBI and every human being that was a witness. I believe we could have stopped what happened. But I just believe the government that they were going to go ahead and let David Koresh do his 7 seals. He didn't want to kill himself. He had a book. He had a movie. He had millions of dollars already guaranteed through New York. He wanted to put his 7 seals out, I believe, and make a mark for his Branch Davidian, whether they're right or wrong. There was no reason in the world, no reason, why all those people ended up dying. And Charlie Brown called me and said, after the event, and said, Bo, if you would have had 3,000 patriots willing to weather the storm, could you have prevented that? Could you have broken the police line at WACO? And my answer was yes. If we had had 3,000 patriots, if we'd had a regiment of Minutemen willing to put down their labor and to leave their families and to assemble wherever it was required, we could have broken that police line. We could have gone right through there, and sure enough, there would have been casualties. Any number would have been tackled by 4 or 5 or 6 of the black shirts, and they would have been secured with the little plastic bands. And there would have been a lot of screaming and hollering and yelling, and maybe there would have been some CS gas put on us, and there would have been armored vehicles trying to break up the formation. But with 3,000 of us, yes, I had to answer honestly, yes, we could have, but we didn't. 10:30 Sunday night, before the Monday morning fire, Jack McLam sat with me in the Golden Nugget. The gentleman that I took, the police officer from Phoenix, that helped up there in North Idaho. Jack said, Bo, we have got to get between the government and the Branch Davidian, or all those people are going to die. And I said, Jack, I know what you're saying is true, because Jack and I both have a good feel for the government, and once their alternatives run out, they only deal in complete and total deadly force. And it had run to the point where they were being made fools of by David Koresh, that 51 days into the siege. And so I still did not see the tremendous urgency. I told him, Jack said, he was this urgent. Who knows what kind of messenger that he received. But he said, Bo, please, let's just take a couple of parachutes and let's jump right on top of that compound. Let's do anything we have to get in there. Now that was Jack McLam. And I looked at him at 10:30 on Sunday night and I said, Jack, you're right. I said, but you got to know what the winds are like there in Waco, Texas. The point is, Jack McLam was willing, Jack McLam was ready. I called the FBI once on the second day and once in the third week of March and complained to Gene Glenn, he's chief agent for the western states. His headquarters in Salt Lake. And I said, Gene, he said, Bo, I've made the recommendations, strong recommendations. He said, I think that they are at loggerhead. I don't think they're going to make any progress. He said, I've recommended that you be allowed to go in there. But you know, the only person that was allowed to go in there was a Houston lawyer. And you know the background of the Houston lawyer. He is college mates with William Sessions, head of the FBI. And even he was turned back time and time again as he went to the police line trying to make a dent, until he finally called his college mate, William Sessions, and said, as a personal favor to me, please give me the way to go through there. And so the director of the FBI said, go ahead. And that's what secured entrance for him. It makes you wonder why, when overtly to the media, the FBI is saying, we are welcoming any solution, any alternative, when actually there was no alternative at all. In the Weaver situation, they had the helicopter with the fuel cell. And in case there are just a handful of you who aren't aware, because there is such a parallel, the day before I arrived on the Weaver scene, there was a man named Jack that Weaver worked for. He was the principal logger in that area. And there was a newsman. Out of the probably hundreds of news people that at one time or other passed through Ruby Creek in northern Idaho, this fellow was the only one arrested. He was with Jack. They went up to Jack's place, which was higher than Randall Weaver's. And Jack took me up there, and I could look through the television camera on Zoom, because it was just a little over a mile away, I would estimate, and I could see the Weaver cabin, so I could get an estimate of what was going on there before I tried to break the police line. Also, so I could get an estimate in case I had to use other means to try to infiltrate the police barricades and get back there on my own. Jack told me himself, and so did the newsman who was there with a TV camera, that they had watched this helicopter. You got to understand the FBI team. They have 100 men under the charge of a man named Dick Rogers. Richard Rogers is what I call Darth Vader. He's a big, tall fellow, but when he puts on all of his bucket helmet and his Kevlar and his camouflage, he looks a lot like Darth Vader. He's just about as ugly, too. Very candidly. Dick Rogers has 100 of these guys. When I was very close to them up there at Ruby Ridge, I asked them, I said, don't you guys do anything except set-ups, push-ups, and pull-ups all day long? They didn't look like FBI agents. They looked like my commandos from places I've been all around the world. These are elite combat fighting troops. They do one thing really well, and that is close with and kill or capture the enemy. That's their whole attitude. It is the attitude of the bayonet, the same thing that our U.S. Army Rangers are taught. They're good, they're young, they have little or no compassion for their target because they completely isolate themselves. As a matter of fact, they had the target built up, in the case of Weavers, and I'm sure in the case of WACO, of being people who were hate mongers, who had evil oozing from every pore. Matter of fact, they had been told, the FBI, that this was a Nazi group, a hate group, who had mercilessly killed, murdered William Deegan and pinned them down for 12 hours. This was a continuing gunfight. There was a fellow by the name of Farr, Ed Farr. This is the first time I've given out his name. The reason I'm giving out his name is because he's getting a little faint-hearted about testifying at the Weaver trial. And I want him to begin to feel a little heat. He was afraid he might have some repercussions come down on him if he were to come out for Weaver. Well, I don't care what comes down on anybody. The truth is the truth, and if you're going to live in America, especially at this time, you better be willing to stand for the truth, regardless of what it means, as far as your own personal concerns are. But Ed Farr was... Ed Farr was a member of the disaster survey team for the Red Cross. They were called in there not for the hundreds of people at Ruby Creek to feed and care for them. They were called in to feed and care for the hundreds of federal forces that were there. Ed Farr was a supervisor. He arrived on the day that they shot Vicki Weaver in the face. Ed Farr told me personally, sought me out to tell me because of an urge of his conscience. He said, Bo, I couldn't believe it. I was standing behind some of this FBI hostage rescue team. They were loading the magazines in their submachine guns. And they were saying, no one's coming off that hill. We're going to kill them all. He said that night after they shot Vicki Weaver, they came down very proudly and put up a sign proclaiming the camp, Camp Vicki. He said they didn't take that sign down until the day you came into camp. Then they took the sign down. I didn't see it anymore. Do you think this is important testimony? I think it's darned important. But Ed was saying, oh, Bo, please, don't mention this. I said, I'm going. I said, Ed, you have got to testify to this. I said, I'm going to tell Jerry Spence. He said, well, he can't call me on the phone because I'm afraid my phones may be tapped. I said, Ed, we'll arrange a meeting, but you have got to be strong enough. He said, my wife doesn't want me to get involved in this. Listen, Minutemen are called, and some of them are chosen. By gosh, Ed Farr is somebody who needs to come out. Now, he doesn't live here. He lives way up in northern Idaho. So he'll probably never know that I'm talking about him tonight. But the fact is that he needs to testify. And I want you to put it in your prayers, along with Weaver and Kevin Harris, that Ed Farr will have the courage to do so. That he won't shrivel up when this challenge comes to him, because he may not be very popular, especially as a member of the Red Cross, and whatever that means to him. Now, to show you how parallel this thing is, that chopper that was up there, they have a helicopter that travels with this hostage rescue team. The helicopter fits inside of a big government plane, along with an armored personnel carrier. They got one to go to them, along with a van, and this van includes their robot people. They got a 750-pound robot they call the Zogbot that goes with them as a unit. And they have 100 of them that travel wherever they're required across this nation. That day, the newsman and the logger told me they both saw a helicopter with a fuel cell hovering over the Weaver cabin, as if they were going to drop the fuel on the cabin. That they began to jump up and down and wave their arms wildly. They said they were just about on eye level with the pilot, who was looking straight ahead trying to hold his hover. He said the pilot noticed them, and he said they could see the pilot tell the aircraft commander and point. And he said the aircraft commander looked and saw them and then aborted the mission, and the helicopter flew back down to the valley. It was only a short time later that newsman was arrested. I don't know what happened to him, but as far as I know, he's the only news person that was arrested in the entire Ruby Ridge incident. But you see, when you're under martial law, the laws change quite a bit, don't they? And so I got up there and couldn't believe it. When I was told this by the newsman and the logger, I went to the man in charge, Dick Rogers, up on top, right where it happened, and I said, Dick, did you guys have a helicopter up here with a fuel cell hovering over the Weaver cabin? He said, yes, we had a helicopter up here, Bo, with a fuel cell. He said, but that was just to resupply us, our generators, our vehicles, the other things that need gasoline up here. And I said, well, Dick, if that was all it was, why didn't you just go ahead and land it instead of aborting the mission when they saw you? He didn't have any answer for that. But once I saw what happened in Waco, I truly believe, regardless of what the arson reports say, regardless of what the government apologists say, one, it's in direct opposition to what the Branch Davidian survivors are saying, but it doesn't make any sense to me. But I want to share with you some technical knowledge tonight that may help you to make your own decisions and understand a little more about what's going on. First of all, I turned on the television Monday morning early, and there this M88 tank retriever was ripping away at the front of the Branch Davidian and pumping in CS gas. CS gas is not tear gas. Tear gas, CN, is just one component of CS. CS is about 80 times more potent than tear gas. Now, tear gas is an irritant, but CS is not. CS has a lethal dosage. CS is a war gas. Matter of fact, those of you who were in Vietnam in the early years will be able to testify, CS was outlawed. We couldn't use it in Vietnam against the communists because it was a war gas. CS gas incapacitates. That is the descriptive word. CS is an incapacitant, and it has a lethal dosage. Anyone, now you could look this up, the field manual is 3-9 as far as I recall. I've got it at home and probably should have brought it. Any of you want the actual sheet, all you got to do is call out there and talk to Rhonda or April, and we'll Xerox it so you'll have the same sheet of music that tells you, it's right out of the U.S. Army Field Manual on chemicals. And it tells you that anyone who is in the airspace where CS gas has been projected will be incapable, not just debilitated, incapable of any coherent action. And we've even got a videotape. I can't give one to everybody, but I'll tell you what, I'll sure give one to people like Ray and the Toodles. You can have it for free, that shows exactly what happens when just a little CS gas, not 5 hours worth out of an M88 sprays it into your compound that is sealed against government infiltration, but just a little, what happens to you? And believe me, it is not just inhumane. It is insufferable. That's what it is. When the FBI was talking about the child abuse, and that's the reason they thought it was necessary to go in there. Since when does the FBI take care of child abuse? As far as I know, there are abusive units within the city and the county and the state that handle that very well. I didn't know this was a federal offense now. But can you imagine the abuse? The abuse, 17 children under the age of 12 died in that Holocaust. And before they died of fire They, for all of those hours, for about 6 hours, they were totally, their airspace was totally consumed by CS gas, which is vomiting gas. When the sheet that you can have, that I'll send to you, it sends very, very carefully, it says there, that this induces vomiting. That is part of the mixture of this chemical. That your eyes clamp shut involuntarily. You can't see anything. And that you will find a tightening of your chest. And that breathing will be difficult, and in large doses, impossible. Now here's something else that I remarked to my bride as I saw this thing unfolding before the fire started. I told her, I said, you know, they're going to blow that whole place up. Because I can't believe the FBI, with all of their military advice, with President Clinton saying, go ahead, and with Janet Bush Reno right there making personal decisions. I can't believe that they wouldn't have a sensitivity for what I'm about to tell you. But I've never denied it. I am a highly trained, I have been an instructor of Special Forces operations for many years of my life. I'm a highly trained Special Forces operative. One of the missions of Special Forces is sabotage. And one of the adjuncts of sabotage is arson. And in the act of arson, Special Forces operatives, when you have a large area, now this isn't even a large area, but if you had something like maybe this whole library, which is a fairly large complex, which approximates the Branch Davidian, just about 1 square block. When you have a large factory, when you're in a large theater, a hangar, for example, then you use a thing called dust initiator. And dust initiator, while it may sound simplistic, it's none of the truth. The dust we use is baby powder, but it's very, very fine. We don't have any preference for Johnson's or any other, but baby powder is the medium. And what happens is you explode the baby powder first, for just a moment. The baby powder fills every cubic inch of airspace. Then you detonate or you ignite your initiator charge. And the median of the baby powder through the air carries this, either magnifying your blast or the fire, as a tremendous accelerant that could never be possible if it were not for what we call a dust initiation. Literally, every cubic inch catches fire. Every cubic inch becomes part of an explosion because you have this, what would it be, a transmission of all of these little dust particles. In CS gas, there are 2 ways to disperse it. Usually it's dispersed by fire, meaning that the police shoot a grenade through the window, it hits the floor and starts spewing. That is initiated by flame. Or you take a grenade and you pull the pin and you throw the canister in and it starts sputtering out the gas. That is flame initiated. The FBI was accurate when they said, we purposefully chose non-pyrotechnic CS gas, meaning that it didn't get its initiation from fire. But friends, integral to the CS gas, you don't separate it, no matter what form it comes in, whether it's fire or whether it's in liquid stream that was being pumped out by that M88. It still has a dispersant that is called CAP. In the chemical dictionary, the dispersant is highly toxic, and it is also highly flammable, and goes to make in this toxicity for CS gas and the flammability of it. So you would have to have been an idiot, and I don't believe that the FBI, not all of them that were up there, not the probably hundreds of staff people who helped make these decisions, they're not ignorant. I think they knew precisely what was going to happen. And then it sounds pretty logical. The Branch Davidian says that the tanks and that the M88 raking the front of the building and the tanks crushing in on the other sides knocked over the lamps. In a interview, because the gentleman that we saw come out of the Branch Davidian, one of the survivors, with second-degree burns on his right arm, he gave an interview from the jail, the county jail that night. And he says, David Koresh and most of the adults, with me as an exception, a few of us, were in the cafeteria. He said the tanks began hitting the building and broke the main support over the roof of the cafeteria. The roof fell in, pinning all of the adults. He said that they didn't have a choice. When you look at the bodies and the way they're found, they are face down. Now the coroner has said, looks to me like one, or I don't know how many they determine now because they're working their way through this rather slowly, but they'll probably find several, because they said some of the bodies face down still were clutching weapons. If you were faced either with consumption by fire or by a bullet in the brain, which one would you take? For you or your loved one? Friends, smoke inhalation and being consumed by fire, none of them are good alternatives, are they? All of them precipitated, I believe, in this case, by the appropriately black-shirted, black-helmeted, black-trousered, gold badge-carrying federal troops. The Nazis are certainly alive. We have the Fourth Reich with us today in the United States, but they're wearing gold badges. Again, look at the logic. Now, in the interview, the gentleman from the survivor said, the tanks knocked over the lanterns that we had, giving us light. And the interviewer said, well, what in the world were you doing with lanterns lit in the daytime? And he said, it was dark in our compound. All the windows were covered, all the doors were closed. We were under siege. We couldn't see in there. We had to have lights burning 24 hours. And remember, and one thing they did clear up, I read it in the RJ today, remember the huge explosion where the FBI said that was that large cache, there was a 100-pound bomb in there. And some guy called me when I was on the Chuck Carter radio program, as I recall, and said, Bo, looked a lot like a propane explosion to me. Well, those of us that use propane, like out in Sandy Valley, know what can happen like that. As a matter of fact, the arson investigator said that big explosion we all saw on television was set off by propane. Now, how many of you knew that some of the Branch Davidian had federal firearms licenses? As a matter of fact, a few of you, good. Today, I read in the RJ where the one person, he escaped by just a matter of hours. One of the Branch Davidian had gone to a gun show and had left the compound just before the BATF came in on their assault. Now, federal firearms licenses mean that you can do what the Branch Davidian apparently was doing, and that is possess, collect, modify guns. If you sell them or if you transfer them, they have to be done under license properly. But there's no law against it as long as you follow the government's procedure. And so the one comment that I thought was most apropos on the Chuck Carter program, as I recall it was Chuck, they called in and said, Bo, why did they hit the Branch Davidian? Why don't they hit a lot of the street gangs? Why don't they hit the mafia? Why don't they hit organized criminals? That's because none of these elements bother to register their guns. It's only the Branch Davidians that have legal, lawful federal firearms licenses. So this is one thing. And then another thing just to think, because I believe that we, through the Patriot Movement, need to get the truth out, get the facts that are logical, that are conclusive, before the government gets off the hook. And then I've got something for us to do, as usual, before we leave here. I believe that you can see that just through logic, that what the government did was totally wrong, and somebody needs to be held responsible. Now, if they did have federal firearms licenses, and in 1988, if the sheriff called David Koresh in 88 and said, David, we have an arrest warrant for you and 6 of your followers. We're coming out to your house to effect this arrest. We wanted to let you know that we're coming. Would you please be ready to submit to that arrest? Now, if the sheriff can do that in 1988, and David Koresh and 6 of his followers walk out and submit to an arrest, and are taken before a judge, and are tried, and with a hung jury are released, because the government's case obviously wasn't strong enough to try them again, why couldn't the sheriff call him in 1993 and say, David, here we are again. It's instant replay, only this time the BATF wants to come out and search. Why couldn't we just try that? Because, you see, in 1988, we had one level of government and law enforcement. In 1993, we have an entirely different one, don't we? And this thing is getting worse, literally, by the day. Because I don't have time, but let me ask you, and then I'll know. How many of you take McIlvaney's newsletter or have access to it? You need to spread that around as much as you can. I think that Don McIlvaney did a great service. I've done it in my newsletter, but he was more complete. McIlvaney puts out a better newsletter than I do, but he's got a whole staff of people to do it. But some of the things that I tell you, Don McIlvaney comes to me and says, Bo, I need to know these things because I try to give you some exclusivity, some deep information on what's going on, where Don generally gives you a broad brush. He gave a list of names about, 2 months ago, of the people that had been abused by the BATF. And it was legion. I mean, there's Mrs. Knudsen up in Washington. Again, why don't they ever hit anybody? They're just like predators, aren't they? You know, the shark doesn't attack the healthy sea lion. The lion doesn't attack the healthy wildebeest. They always wait until they get someone who's weak or behind or who's vulnerable. Then they attack and chew them to bits. The law enforcement agencies, at least at the federal level today, are no different than the predators are in the jungle. And that's what they're turning our country into. But Mrs. Knudsen in Washington State's just a mom. She's got 2 little kids. Here come 25 BATF officers handcuffing her, separating her from her children, tearing her home apart, and finding nothing. And when asked by the news, wasn't this a little severe? The agent says, well, we'd rather err on the side of too much and too many than we would on too little.
Yeah, right.
But there's no, we're sorry, Mrs. Knudsen, for tearing your home up. And then in the case of a young woman that'll just break your heart with 3 little girls coming back from choir practice in Portland, Oregon on the 2nd of February, Janice Hart, she finds again BATF agents have taken the door off the hinges. Nobody just knocks. They ought to get some of my spike students to go to work for them. At least we could pick the locks and let them in without tearing the door off the hinges. There they are. She rushes up because here's obviously a whole bunch of people who have broken into her home. And they're taking the dishes and just scraping them out of the pantries and out of the shelves, breaking on the floor, busting the lamps, looking inside the chairs by breaking them, tearing the stuffings out of the sofas, ripping the beds apart, and she demands, who are you and why are you in my home? And then they grabbed her, handcuffed her, hand and foot, take her down to the basement, separate her from her little girls who were screaming and hollering. BATF agent shoves the little girls in the car outside, slams the door on the older girl, who's only 9 years old, leg, and says, you kids shut up and stay in this car. What kind of terrorism is that for those little girls? And for 3 hours, they're completely separate from the mom. They would never tell Janice Hart what she was charged with. Something's wrong about that. They would never identify themselves to her. They just kept saying, you're a gun runner. You're a doper. Where are the guns? Where's the dope? And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. She's half insane. Can you imagine that happening to you? You're not prepared for this kind of thing. You're just a normal person. Finally, they took her downtown where the city police did the fingerprinting, and the city policewoman says, uh-oh, you guys have got the wrong person. And the BATF say, oh, gee whiz, well, so much we're off on the chase again. No, there's no we're sorry. And how do they take care of the house? I mean, here now is a home that is totally destroyed. Here are 3 little girls that are in therapy. You know, how do we repair this? And who is going to stand responsible? Look at all the death you already know about in the case of Weaver's. Friends, these are just a couple little cases. Francis Scott called me the other day. It's been about 3 weeks ago now. That's on the Donald Scott case in California. Do you know
that here Donald Scott, with cataract surgery, cannot see. His wife checks what she thought was an earthquake. All the dogs are barking. She said, I ran out. She said, here's his angry face looking at me through the window. And she said, I'm going to go open the door. And all of a sudden the door comes right off the hinges and the room is filled with men wearing raincoats. No identification, but just drawn guns. She said, I just screamed, don't kill me, don't shoot me. My husband, who couldn't even see who shot him, she said, came out of the bedroom with his .38, and the last words he ever spoke were, she said, Francis, are you all right? Shot twice and killed. And the grand jury returns with its finding that there's no wrongdoing on the part of the government. They break into a home. Now, their warrant that a magistrate had signed said that the government thought that Donald Scott had 50 marijuana plants hanging from trees in the sky. That's the quote. So here's my point. If there are 50 marijuana plants out there in his backyard somewhere, hanging from trees in the sky, how is he going to flush them down the toilet if somebody bothers to walk up and knock on the door and say, Donald Scott, we believe you're a doper and you got 50 marijuana plants hanging from the trees. We're going to go check. What's wrong with that? Why do you take the door off the hinges? But the law says, here they are, filled in the house with guns, with his wife, his bride. He can't see because of his surgery. Still comes out, and they shoot him in his own home, and yet the grand jury. And who is before the grand jury? The only person that is allowed. It is the all-powerful government lawyer, the district attorney in this case. Do you think there was anyone allowed to appear for Francis Scott or for Donald Scott's case? No, no. And so can you imagine the lies? Matter of fact, it was found just in 1991 that the district attorney, the county attorney, the state attorney general, and any of his people, the U.S. attorneys can lie before the grand jury and not be held responsible for the lies they tell that gets you indicted, that brings you into court.
Who made that rule?
That's been found all the way up by the Supreme Court. They cannot be held responsible even if they lie before the grand jury. And when you go back and look at the grand jury transcripts, for example, of the Weaver situation, boy, you see lies in legion there. Let me tell you one thing that's come out with the grand jury testimony, and now the trial that's ongoing in Boise, Idaho. A man by the name of Horiuchi, Lon Horiuchi, was the FBI sniper. I'll bet you he's got a special medal from the FBI. I laid in his sniper's nest just a little over a week ago when we first went up there when the trial started. Matter of fact, I was up there in Lon Horiuchi's sniper nest on the 15th of this month. After the FBI took over, just like they did in WACO, on the second day of the WACO siege, they did the same thing in northern Idaho. The sniper teams that travel with this hostage rescue unit, they have two people that are part of one team. Horiuchi was the shooter, and a man named Monroe was his number two, or his security. He has an M16. Horiuchi has a Remington sniper rifle with a 10-power scope. It's .308 in caliber, and they use only match ammunition. You know, they can knock the eye out of a gnat at probably 200 yards, and I can see the reason that they would need to be able to do this. But just listen to this testimony, official testimony. Lon Horiuchi says that on Saturday morning, they saw the Weavers come out of the cabin and go to this little birthing room that was about 10 yards from the cabin. Weaver's religious convictions were such that when Vicky gave birth to Elishaba, who was 10 months at that time, that she gave birth in this little birthing cabin, and then she stayed there for like 30 days or whatever the Old Testament rules require. She lived in that little birthing, a little dollhouse. It was about, I'd say 12 foot square. The FBI, by the way, took the whole thing. When I was up there, they had pushed it with a tank off of its foundations, but they have lifted the whole birthing cabin up and taken it. It's probably somewhere in display now within the government archives. Horiuchi says that he saw Weaver come out. He thought it was Kevin Harris. Right. Kevin Harris is a full foot taller than Randall Weaver. He says that as he lifted to open the latch, he shot him in the back. Now, Randall Weaver was shot without warning in the back. The bullet then came out underneath his right armpit. That was a .223. I don't know why the government is lying, but I still have to relate this to Jerry Spence because I didn't know this until I got a chance to see the grand jury transcripts. Lon Horiuchi did not shoot Randall Weaver. Monroe shot Randall Weaver. It would be an insult to a sniper with a 10-power scope at between 150 and 200 yards to make such a bad shot that he hit the guy in the upper right back. And it was a .223. I've seen far too many of those bullet holes. Now what happened was, and then he said that he accidentally shot then Vicki Weaver trying to hit the other male running in the cabin. But he hit her precisely right center mass in her face. Now I'll tell you, from a 200-meter shot, let's give him the benefit and say it was all of the 200 yards. It was between 150 and 200 with a 10-power telescope, with a Remington sniper rifle, and right in his nest where he lay, he had fixed the branches so that you could see right where the stock of his rifle had been actually put into the wood so it would steady itself. Now I'll bet you that Vicki Weaver's face filled the reticle at just 200 yards on a 10-power scope. And it would be a perfect shot to hit her center mass. Because he says, he testifies himself, that as he shot her, she was holding the baby in her left arm. She fell to her knees screaming. He said she screamed, these are his words, he screamed for several minutes until she died and collapsed. Then the girls, Sarah and Rachel, pried her fingers from around Elishaba and took the baby. Now, knowing Lon Horiuchi, FBI sniper, on Saturday, shoots Vicki Weaver, the bullet goes in the right side, center mass of her face, exit out the left side because he was a little higher. It broke her left jaw and cut her carotid artery. And she bled to death in only a couple of minutes. Now, knowing that, then the FBI robot the next day rolls up to the back of the Weaver cabin, and every day until I arrive, the FBI says things like, "Good morning, Weavers. We're having blueberry pancakes. What's Vicki fixing you for breakfast this morning? And why don't you have Vicki pick up the telephone and talk to us?" Now, how is it? What do you think they're trying to do? Why would they speak that way? You see, they had Randall Weaver listed, and still do, as a provocateur, someone who goaded, someone who lured. Their words are, he lured them up to his mountain stronghold so that he could have a violent confrontation. Why can't the U.S. attorney just be for justice? Why can't they just do what's right? It's no skin off the U.S. attorney's nose to say, I've investigated this, and I find that the FBI was way out of line here. Because they were told that this family was a bunch of white supremacist Nazis, and they thought that the marshals had been shot down in cold blood, and I find that all this is wrong. What's wrong with that? But oh no, the enormity of the government is placed against the smallness of the individual. And now you see why, even though you're right, your government's wrong. Even though you're right, you still lose, unless you get somebody like Jerry Spence. Now, did you see the same thing in Waco? Here's all of this loud music. Here's all the lights. Here's all the Tibetan chants. Now, isn't that a rather strange way? Do you think the FBI is just stupid? You see, well, thank you. I talked to all those FBI negotiators up there, the same ones that were at WACO, were up there in northern Idaho. Fred was the chief. He's the guy who started the FBI negotiation school at WACO. He's still the chief instructor there. Oh, they crow. Well, matter of fact, you know what Fred said? To the grand jury, Fred said, When Bo Gritz got up here, I trained him on the spot. And he did everything I said, and that's why we resolved this Weaver situation as quick as we did. If Fred is such a good instructor, how come he didn't train himself and some of the others so that they could have gone in and gotten the Weaver situation cleared out? Fred and the others aren't stupid, though. You see, they had Randall Weaver listed as some kind of crazy. They justified killing Vicki because they said they were afraid she was going to kill the children. Sound like WACO? That they were going to commit suicide. Sound like WACO? Sure. And as soon as I got up there, I told them, I said, you guys are all, loony. Anyone who has a drop of Christian blood in them will not even contemplate suicide. It's like spitting in our Father's face. We would never do that. Oh, this is how we did. They were afraid they're going to kill the children. No way. Do you know why I believe that they use this method of saying, Vicki, why don't you pick up the phone? What is your mom, Vicki, fixing you this morning? What are they trying to do? I think they're trying to goad Randall Weaver. Because here is a person, friends, here's a person who on Friday watched his 13-year-old son. You know, in the grand jury testimony, Randall wasn't even a part of the shooting that took place with Kevin Harris and Sammy. They ran with Stryker down the trail. Oh, you ought to. Are you interested in any of this testimony, my boy?
Yeah.
If you're interested, I'll give you some of it. Here, I never know whether that this thing is helping you or if it's just boring you. But here's what their testimony, because you'd never get it otherwise, I don't believe. But their grand jury testimony says this: that the chief agent, the day that they shot little Sammy, the chief agent took this Marshal William Deegan and a man named Cooper. Now the chief agent's name was Roderick. He took them up close to the cabin and they started throwing rocks at the Weaver dogs. Now why do you suppose they were doing that? And Cooper had an MP5 9mm submachine gun. It's a German submachine gun. It's standard use by Delta Force and the CIA counter-terrorist teams. An MP5 with a silencer for the purpose of killing the dogs. Now, we'll just play this as if it were some kind of a little quiz game. Why do you think they were throwing rocks at the dogs? Why do you think that Cooper had an MP5 with a silencer? So see, 9mm ammunition, other than 45, is about the only kind you can get subsonic. So it'll slow down so it doesn't make a big crack, so the silencer is efficient. Why do you think they were doing this? Now their orders, according to the court, their orders were, you will have no confrontation with the Weavers at all. That's what our orders were. They said under no circumstance will you allow any harm to occur to any of the Weaver children. Now that's what the court orders say that the marshals were up there with that day. But yet they're throwing rocks at the Weaver dogs. Why? Because they knew that when the dogs alerted on animals, the Weavers did what? They came out. They came out of their cabin. And so, here's Stryker, yellow Labrador, belongs to Sammy. They're throwing the rocks. Stryker's the only dog that's not tied. He's the family pet. So Stryker starts running after the marshals. Now the marshals have an ambush position set up a short distance from the cabin. And Cooper testifies that his job was to shoot the dogs as they came up because they thought they'd shoot the dogs with the silencers and the Weavers wouldn't know. And then when the Weavers came down the trail looking for the dogs, they'd be in the ambush. And the justification? Well, the Weavers would have guns, wouldn't they? Because normally the dogs alerted on deer, and the Weavers would come out with rifles, and then they would shoot the animals that the dogs had alerted on, and that's how, and they had their own gardens, their own chickens, and this kind of stuff. But you see, things went just a little bit wrong for Mr. Roderick that day, because almost immediately it was young Sammy, 13 years old. The autopsy had him at 70 pounds. That's the size of a 10-year-old, normal. Little Sammy was carrying his gun, and along with Kevin Harris, they were the only two. And they were so close to the dog that Cooper said, I was afraid to shoot the dog because if I did, he said, I could just feel the bullets starting to fly. That's what he testified to. But Roderick testified he did shoot the dog with a .223 M16. He shot Stryker right in the spine. The dog dropped his hindquarters, drug himself around yelping on his front two legs, and that's what Sammy saw. Now, he couldn't see the marshals because it was testified to by Kevin Harris, and they testified that they were in ambush position. They were wearing camouflage. But Kevin said, I could see puffs of smoke coming from the bushes, and I could see this expended brass flying through the air from the machine guns. Little Sammy screamed out and shot toward whatever shot his dog in the spine. And then it was Roderick who hit Sammy in the shoulder, and then it was Marshal Deegan. They picked 6 bullets up, expended rounds from where Deegan was standing, that shot him in the back. And then it was Kevin Harris that fired at whatever. He said, I could see these puffs of smoke. He said, I shot, and then I ran back. Now, does that sound like the Harrises lured the government into a violent confrontation in a mountain stronghold? See, why can't the government tell the truth ever? Then if they ever would bother to try to say something like the Branch Davidian, we might believe it. But if they were telling the truth nowadays, who here would believe it?
Not me.
I mean, you'd be stupid if you would anymore. There's always a hidden agenda, isn't there? And so here is the solution, I believe. Janet Reno, this is a several-part solution. Janet Reno has said that she would be willing to resign if this were found to be excessive force. I don't want Butch Reno's resignation. I want her, and I want the FBI decision makers, and let's throw Stephen Higgins in there because he's head of the BATF, and let's put William Sessions in there before they get rid of him anyway, and let's put all those government apologists. Let's stuff them because they would probably equal the number of people, about 87 people, that was in the Branch Davidian. Let's squash them all into an area made out of glass. Well, we put them in an area like this and have television cameras remotely, of course, hooked up. And then let's not pump 5 hours worth of CS gas. Let's just take one simple, single little canister. That's all. In an area this size. And let's just pop it. And let's say, now, we want the American public to see how humane this use of CS gas is. And then let's see what happens. Let's see if they would be able to go upstairs and the moms gather up the little ones and then rush to the safety of the waiting government. Let's see if they could do that. I think you're going to see a very interesting dance, one that I would enjoy very much, as these people fall on the floor, having never once in their life had anything except a silk purse. And we've been throwing pearls before swine all of this time in the things that we've been allowing them to do. You know, in the military, they require you to go through some of this training. In the military, they send you through a gas chamber with CN, tear gas, in it. You got to take your gas mask off, sing the Star Spangled Banner or something ridiculous like that, go through the alphabet backwards, then put your mask back on and clear it just to show that the mask will work. Then go outside and cough and hack and your eyes bleed for a little bit with tears. But you see, CS gas is not CN. 80 times more powerful. Plus a toxicity that will take life. Plus the tremendous, anybody's a chemist, if you want this page, I'll send it to you by calling Rhonda or by calling April at my home, and you can see for yourself. If you're a chemist, you can figure out exactly what's in CS gas because it's all there. But they put all of this chemistry in there plus tear gas. Friends, it is inhumane. As a matter of fact, it is scheduled to be completely disallowed throughout the world in 1995. By 1995, it is ruled as a gas that is not allowed anywhere.
They found it okay.
But yet they found, Miss Janet Reno has found that the use of CS gas is perfectly all right. Now, the second thing that I believe that has to happen, and if this doesn't happen, you are going to see more and more problems, and that is that Randall Weaver's got to win this trial. Now, I believe certainly that he is going to win. It's interesting that the attorney for the government has subpoenaed over 300 people. Now, why do you suppose he's subpoenaing hundreds of people? It's to keep them away from the trial. You see, I was listening to the prosecution witness, couldn't understand why in the world they'd have me as a prosecution witness. It would certainly be hostile. And then I found the reason, because I got my letter just before the trial started. It says, don't come to Boise, whatever you do. You're one of several hundred that we have subpoenaed, and if we need you, we'll call you, but you stay there unless you're called. So they want to keep people who know what's going on completely away from the trial. Now, of course, they've got everybody on their subpoena list, from Richard Butler, who's head of the Aryan Nations of Hazen Lake in Idaho, to Mr. Henry Hudson, head of the U.S. Marshal Service. So they're going to parade over 158 witnesses, that's what they've actually got on their list, before the jury, hoping that just in the enormity of all of this circus, that the jury will say, well, gosh, they must be guilty of something. If they can just find them guilty of anything. But you know what they're having real trouble with? The original charge for Randall Weaver was he didn't come down for trial. He did go down. When the BATF charged him with having a shotgun 1/4 inch too short, Randall Weaver went down. And he appeared before the judge. And he pled not guilty. And the judge released him on his own recognizance, because Weaver had never had any kind of an offense, not even a traffic ticket against him, in all of the years that he'd been an adult. And so there was no bail required. He was a homeowner, he had his family there, he had been there since 1983. Now, the U.S. Attorney has already consented, this just happened this last week, that the date given for Randall Weaver to come down was much later than the trial date that they had actually set. So they set a trial date for Randall Weaver of one date and had notified him he was supposed to come down much later. Now they're going to have to, in all probability, the judge still hasn't ruled on it, but they're probably going to have to admit that he's not guilty of not showing up for trial. That's the whole cause célèbre for 500 militarized police and all of the wrongful death that went on. What did Randall Weaver do that was so heinous that he is guilty, his wife is guilty, his child is guilty to die by firing squad? What is it that the Branch Davidian did that made them guilty of such a terrible crime that they were to die by a conflagration? Something is wrong with this whole government process. They do not make a phone call. They don't send a letter. There is no more Randolph Scott or Matt Dillon. These guys are being paid too much money. You know, as a guerrilla commander, I had a Cambodian captain that taught me a significant lesson one time. As a young captain myself in Vietnam, I was about 27 at this time, I had these special Cambodian teams that would perform, we call them Cam 2 teams. It means suicide. They were suicide teams, and I wanted to pay them for the risk they were taking. And a close friend of mine, a Cambodian captain, said, don't do it. If you give them money for what they're doing, they will eventually find themselves so valuable that they won't want to serve in the way that they need to, because they may risk losing this money if they're killed. He said you must appeal to them because of their national loyalties, because of their families and what it will mean to them, and because of their religion that the communists are trying to take away from Cambodia and Laos. He says if you'll do this, they'll fight for you and they'll fight hard, and you only need to pay them just what they need to keep their families together. Now that was wise counsel, wasn't it, for a young Special Forces captain who had too much money from the CIA that I knew what to do with. Now that is what I think is wrong with a lot of these federal agents. They are paid so much money anymore. They've got this wonderful retirement plan that every one of them are afraid to stick their face out there and say, Randall or David, we have a warrant. Would you please come out the front door unarmed so that we can talk? Because they're afraid they might get shot, and it's a lot easier if they just go in and take them by force, because then this means they can have more money. And what's the hidden agenda? Was Randall Weaver or David Koresh the bullseye? Doggone it, the Second Amendment, friends, that is the bullseye. What is the 9 ring? It's the First Amendment. What's the 8 ring? I think it's the Fourth Amendment. And the 7th and the 6th ring, they are the 9th and 10th Amendments. Is there much left? Oh, you could say, well, what about, Bo, speedy trial by jury? That's a joke anymore, isn't it? Unless you've got a fully informed jury. And so what is left for us that is not under direct attack? So what is the solution? The solution is to make an indictment. And it should be a citizen's indictment. And it should be an indictment against Stephen Higgins, who is the head of the BATF. If just once, and what should the indictment be for? Oh, I believe for the wrongful death of 4 BATF agents.
Good.
Even their own agents have testified that this thing was stupid. When I talked to Gene Glenn, he says, I can't imagine how infantile the raid plan must have been for them to have had 16 wounded and 4 killed. It doesn't make any sense. It sure doesn't to me, does it to you? So that bureaucrat who rides in the big Cadillac limousine, one of the mighty chiefs in Washington, D.C., that bureaucrat needs to be held responsible for those wrongful deaths and personal injury, plus the wrongful deaths of those 17 children under 12, and the wrongful deaths of all those adult and the personal injury of those who came out. Is that enough crime? Do you suppose if you were so charged, would they put you somewhere where they have to pipe sunlight and air to you? I think so. I mean, we got a guy here. Are you here that tried to take on Steve Wynn? Is that person here?
Mark.
Tried to take on who? What's his name?
Mark.
Mark. Tried to do a little maneuvering against Steve Wynn and found out, what a mighty hammer that is. When you've got the attorney by a part of the anatomy that his heart and mind seems willing to follow. And so Steve Wynn puts on a little squeeze, and the attorneys do what he wants them and get Mark in jail, apparently for days, if not weeks, without his constitutional rights at all being considered. So if we will, and here's what I would ask. Now, and I mentioned to you before that we were going to do something else that we haven't done. Jerry Spence asked me, Bo, please don't do anything nutty. Don't do anything weird, radical, irrational. All of these terms fit the Patriot Movement anymore, don't they? He said, don't do anything, Bo, until this trial is over, because I was disappointed with Jerry Spence. I know that sounds, who am I to be disappointed with a man who I was able to get to agree to defend Weaver and is going to win the case, I believe, in spite of all the enormity of the government, and is not going to charge Weaver a cent. Well, I was disappointed because part of my little maneuverings while I was up there at the Weaver cabin was to get the U.S. attorney to agree to allow Randall to bring any witnesses before a grand jury. See, I felt that we could get Henry Hudson, head of the Marshal Service. I felt we could get maybe William Sessions, head of the FBI, one time brought before a grand jury to have to explain why those wrongful deaths occurred. And maybe the grand jury, if we all prayed hard enough, might just have the gonads to say, we're bringing an indictment down against you. We think a jury of your peers needs to hear this case in open court, that America might know how you people make these decisions that cause the wrongful death of these people who did they cause any problem at all to the community? Was there any danger, public safety-wise? Not in northern Idaho, any danger in WACO that the Branch Davidian had ever caused. Nobody has ever come forward to say so. So I told him, I will not do anything that you don't want me to do until this trial's over. once the trial is over, then I believe we ought to take on the people that Eric Leiter wrote the draft for on the citizen's arrest. And that we ought to press it. Now, how do I do this? I have no idea, other than I was just going to take this football and try to put my head down and just bore it through the line, maybe using the media to try to get some attention on these officials. But this whole idea of a people's grand jury, friends, we've got the cases, I think. If we could just be very selective and very careful in what cases we pick, so that we're 100% right. Do you think that maybe, possibly, Stephen Higgins ought to be investigated, head of the BATF, for all of the wrongs that have occurred out of that branch of government? Shouldn't he be at least investigated by a grand jury? I think so. I believe that the grand jury thinks so. But what is the lock on the door? It's the U.S. attorney. It's the same reason that there won't be anybody brought for wrongdoing in the case of Donald Scott. Because the glib lawyer stands up before the grand jury and says, you see, these officers were under personal risk, and when this man, Donald Scott, came out with the gun, well, of course, they could have lost their lives. He never once says, what were they doing in there? How come they didn't knock on the door and make a phone call? No, he just speaks trying to cover up, and so the grand jury, just like these little old dogs you see in the back of the cars with their heads bobbing up and down, they just agree. Do they not? And so a people's grand jury is really the answer. Again, it won't be because the government allows it. It'll be because we, the people, demand it. It'll be because we, the people, are together. It'll be because we, the people, are smart. We can't be dumb and get this thing done. But now we've got two notches to take care of. The Weaver. Somebody needs to stand for the murder of Sammy and Vicki Weaver. Someone needs to stand for the murder of the people of Ranch Division. Now, these crimes were perpetrated against people, citizens. And we, as people, citizens, have a right, a responsibility, and a duty that when the law will not, then we, who is the keeper of the liberty? George Washington made that statement very clear. One of my favorite pictures that I put up at all the spike training is President George Washington offering a pen to you, saying, will you sign? Because we, the people, are the only keepers of the liberty of these United States. So, I don't know, I've heard that Eric is around. Okay, so I would ask that Eric, because during this siege, one thing that Eric did that I didn't especially agree with, I was glad that he went from Hawaii, where he lives, all the way to Texas. But when they arrested the governor of Texas, Ann Richards, I wasn't in favor of it. My grandma grew up in Texas. I know how these Texans are. And Ann Richards did not surrender her counties like Andrus did. So I thought that might have set a lot of the Texas Rangers, the Texas sheriffs, the Texas people against them. And that's not what we need. And it wasn't Richards that needed to be arrested. It was that turkey who is up in Washington, District of Criminals, Stephen Higgins. Now that guy ought to have been arrested because he was ultimately, you're seeing Reno because she thinks she's going to get away with it. But if you brought, she is the wiener in this case, but the weenie is this guy, Mr. Stephen Higgins. By the way, we've already discussed it, I think, with you. If you ever want to really make the government mad, you call anyone in the government that you want to just cause them to lose control, you call them a weenie. I don't know why it works, but it does. It is the code word. I wouldn't advise you to use it unless you really want them to come after you. But when you want them swinging out of control, that's the code word. The first time I did it was with Richard Childress in the White House. He was the man in charge of prisoner of war rescue in the White House. So when he was criticizing what we were doing in the field 12,000 miles away, I said, before the media, when they said, well, Richard Childress says, and I said, well, who's that weenie? What does he know? He's up there in the White House. We're down down here with our fingernails dirty, carrying these blasted rucksacks on our back. Oh, he came apart. His exalted ship. I mean, here we are, the ultimate potentate in his own mind, and to be called a weenie by just a common person. Well, at that time, Childress then put his watchdogs out. Anytime I even tried, I had an appointment, I'm a life member of the VFW. My home post, which was Thousand Oaks, California at that time, invited me to speak. Childress himself from the White House called up and said, don't have Bo Gritz speak there. He's not the kind of person that you want to speak to American veterans. Really. So then the second time I used this most effectively was with the U.S. Attorney in Idaho, Maurice Ellsworth. Jerry Gillespie, my sidekick that quit his job and went around and helped me to get organized in our campaign throughout all the states. He's the triple guy. Jerry grew up with Maurice Ellsworth. He moved from Arizona so he could get this exalted position given by the President of the United States as the U.S. Attorney for Idaho. And he called when Jerry and I got there on Monday for the trial. Jerry Gillespie went up to say hello to him. And Maurice Ellsworth said, Jerry, you've got to get away from this guy, Bo Gritz. And Gerald says, well, why is it, Maury, that you worry so much about him? He said, he called me a weenie. He did it to all the newspapers and they printed it. If it succeeds in 2 cases, then I think we're in pretty good ground that if you want to cause an inflammation somewhere where at least you'll get action, just call somebody a weenie. In the letter that I wrote to Bill Clinton and to Miss Reno, I didn't call either one of them a wiener. But if I write them again, I will. The things that we did wrong, I honestly have to say it, and I do. And I came in here with this attitude, and I want to leave here with this attitude, and that is that we didn't do right in this case, friends. The second day of that siege, when I looked at it, I said, geez, I can't believe this thing's going on. Look, they've killed all these people. You see, when the government loses one of their people, now it's all retribution. We're going to kill them all. That's the attitude, isn't it? I saw it up on Ruby Ridge firsthand. We're going to kill them all. Nobody's coming out of there alive. They just about did, didn't they? In both cases. And it certainly wasn't their fault. They didn't kill them all in the case of the Branch Davidian. And so, in March, here we still have this thing drug out. I'm calling the FBI again. And you know, one reason why I didn't get haughty and just try to bust the police line is because after this Weaver situation was over, I got so much flack. And I'm a lot like a turtle. I just pull my head in, and those verbal bullets just bounce right off of my shell. But my bride doesn't like it a bit. Because she did a lot of worrying when we were up there, and here's another little parallel. When the same guy who was in charge of WACO told me on Sunday night, he said, "Oh, this thing is over. You don't get them to come out tomorrow, we're taking them out." And I said, "Dick, we're not going to leave that family." And he said, "Bo, you do whatever you want to." I think they kind of had this in part of the plan. He says, "You do whatever you want to. But you better be prepared, because if you can't get them to come out, we already have explosives prepared. We're going to blow the windows and the doors, and we're going to take them out." And I said, "Well, we're not leaving them." He said, "Well, then you figure out what you're going to do." Now, you've never been in the Weaver cabin. And we took some television cameras up there, and while the government was saying that it's a mountain stronghold, we were showing that it was made out of plywood, up on stilts, and the front end even fell down on its own. There was no stronghold, even though Weaver, as a Special Forces sergeant, could have made it that way. Gene Glenn asked me, the first moments I got, once cleared from Washington District of Criminal, he said, "Bo Gritz wants to go up there? Where this loony is? Send him up there. Maybe they'll kill each other or something." But from that point, Gene said, "Bo, what do you think this guy will have up there as a Special Forces sergeant?" You see, Weaver wasn't just a Special Forces soldier, he was a demolitions expert. He was one of what we call an engineer for us. He's the kind of guy that builds our encampments. He could have made that mountain area a stronghold. I said, "I don't know, Gene. I don't even know him." I said, "But if it were me, I'd have 55-gallon drums of gasoline turned into napalm. And he says, well, how do you do that? I said, it's simple. You take gasoline, you chop up ivory soap, you put it in there, it turns it into jellied gasoline. I said, I'd have that planted out there. I said, I'd have Claymore. He said, where do you use Claymore mines? I said, you make them right out of a coffee can. It's real simple. Anybody in Special Forces knows how to do this. He says, good grief, you think he'd have all that stuff? But you see, he didn't have anything. He didn't have anything. He could have, but he didn't. He wouldn't even let them goad him. Boy, the Lord has never tested me, and I hope that he doesn't. But can you imagine if they would have killed my daughter, Melody, they would have killed my bride, Claudia, you would have had Rambo 10, 11, 12, whatever his next all over again. Because, see, to me, I think, in my demented post-war stress syndrome, stressed out self, to me, this life wouldn't have been worth living. These are the most precious things in my life. And if they are wrongfully, if they are abused or killed or murdered, I'm going, if needs be, to expend my life. And even though that might not be right according to Scriptures, nonetheless, and I pray I'm never tested, but that's what I believe will happen. I think that's what they wanted to happen. I think that's why they tried to goad Weaver by his dead bride laying there saying, what are you fixing this morning, Vicky? Knowing she was laying there dead for 8 days in her own blood and body fluids at the Branch Davidian with all that hocus pocus that they were playing at night. They were trying to goad those people into some kind of a firefight so they would have a reason to go in and wipe them all out. And in the end, without any reason, they almost did anyway, if it wouldn't have been for the intervention. And in the case, we just didn't do it soon enough. And I'm here to tell you, and what I'd like to ask you, because this is something that you need to ponder. In the future, I'm wondering, in the future, if we will have this again, if Weaver doesn't win his trial, and if somehow the people do not come together in an intelligent, meaningful way, not outside the law, that's what they'd love, but within the Constitution, within the law, if we don't come together that way, they're going to continue to do it until finally they've got saddles on our back. And we weren't born that way. And so we have just got to. But I wonder here, how many, when this happens again, and when Jack McLam pushes me and says, Bo, we have got to get in there, and Charlie Brown called and says, Bo, if you had 3,000, could you make the difference? How many people here would be willing to stop what they were doing and go to a place where they may face danger? How many people would do that? Well, I think we're going to need those kinds of people. And it's not easy when you're suddenly called or asked to go. But how do we make that call? There's only one way, and that is talk radio. Or that's over these little low-power stations that we have. You're not going to see it on ABC, CBS, NBC, I'll guarantee it. Not on CNN, not with Ted Turner. Never happened. And Jane Fonda, nope. You're going to hear about it through these little patriot groups that are intelligent, that are not weird. They're not out there trying to shoot federal judges. Instead, they're out there trying to work within the law before the law fails. And one thing that'll help, and I finally, you got to be patient with me. From the time I've been wearing a uniform, literally, from the time that I was 14 years old, in cadet gray or in army green. And when you grow up that way and all you've had is the government, it's pretty hard to get your eyes fully open. But finally, I think my eyes are coming open to the point where this last week I finally received my citizenship papers of the Republic of Nevada. That is where... And I think is the last word that I would say, that the U.S. Attorney for the Rodney King incident, when they were giving the verdict of the jury, did it best. When they asked him, why wasn't this double jeopardy? the state of California found these officers innocent. Now the federal government tries them for the very same thing, even though you label it civil rights. It's the same thing. And the answer, U.S. Attorney, CNN, to maybe, potentially, millions of people, says, you have to understand, we have two countries out here. We've got the one country, which is the state of California, and then we've got the other country, which is the United States. And these two countries, if you have citizenship, they can be tried in both countries, and it's not double jeopardy because they're separate countries. Am I wrong by saying country? No, that's the exact word they use in the law. And so, friends, if you're going to be a citizen of both countries, then you've got double trouble on your hands. And so that's why I advise you, and I invite you to begin to investigate what it is that you as an individual can do to be able to withstand against the government storm, and mainly, what are we going to do? I want Eric Leiter to remain patient and brave. I want this indictment to go through once the Weaver trial is over for those people that we indicted up there. And then I want him to indict those that were involved in this WACO situation. And he can't do it by himself. But he can write up the indictment, and then we, the people, through a people's grand jury, can do what the government hasn't. And what is Nevada doing right now that I think is just wonderful, that's against the Constitution? Thank you. They have, you see the color money's not green. They have gold and silver now. Let's really support that particular effort, because it says that you can't do that. But if the federal government's not going to do it, then let Nevada do it and stick it right up their pokey so that maybe they'll wake up. Thank you, sir. No? I'll do anything you want me to. Okay. Thank you, folks. Hold on, folks. Please. Please remain seated. We just have a few announcements to make before Bo can work his way out to the lobby where we won't be tying up the whole hall trying to create a fire hazard. But anyhow, Dr. Leila Marie, would you stand up, please? Dr. Leila. Let me announce this. Dr. Leila Marie has had a silver coin struck at her own expense as a commemorative issue in honor of vote rights. And anyone wanting a copy of this, she'll have them outside. Probably as you go out, turn left when you hit the hallway going out, and Leila Marie will be out there. You can see those coins. They're beautiful. They're 1 full ounce of silver with vote rights face on one side. It's always a tough thing to follow vote rights. Tough is hardly the word for it. I mean, this man is dynamite.
Dynamite, yeah.
But as you can see, we do have a problem. He has pointed out many of them. There's many more. And if you are willing to become active, willing to stick your neck out a little bit, then we'd like to have you sign up for the People's Grand Jury. We'll have someone outside of the door, immediately outside of the door, to take your names. If you don't have the opportunity, you may call us, write down our phone number. I'm Stan Kessler. My bride is Thelma. Our number is 255-1151.
What was that?
Let me check that out myself. 255-1151.
These are ask them if anybody would like to sign up if they didn't get a chance.
Yes.
They can come up here.
All right, you can also come up front with the sign up if you will. Thelma will be up front. Thank you, folks. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your help.
teeth. I don't know.
Hello, Thelma.
I'll smile. I want you to get me with Paul.
Is your window, is your one perfect for windows, or is it
We should know about, Corky?
Pardon me?
Any tricks we should know about in here?
Oh, I don't know about how the seats, they feel so good. Other than the fact that it's so heavy when it runs over your toe. It happened to me once. It ran over my toe.
put them on pickup and stuff like that. So we get them on down, and it comes down. Are we ready? Thank you, sir. We'll see you on Thursday.
And there goes into the night. April 27th, 1993.